everybody. No, I can't say that. Hello, good evening, good day, good morning to wherever you are at the moment. And welcome back to the Mini Albums podcast by Zigentala. Hello, my name is Lilith. I'm your host. I'm also the creator behind Zigentala and by extension, the creator behind the mini album series online. Welcome back to the second episode, guys. I would just like to say thank you to all of those that tuned into the first episode. I haven't really pushed it much on my social media yet because I really want to sort of create a foundation of episodes before I start pushing it. At the moment, I'm still just trying to find my feet in regards to structure. I really want to add some more segments onto this podcast, but I'm not quite sure what or how, and I feel like that will just organically come over the next couple of episodes. Thank you so much for tuning in and welcome to the second episode. If you're new, hello. We discuss albums on this podcast. The last album we discussed, the first album of the whole podcast, was Demon Days. And today we're going to be talking about Like Clockwork by Queens of the Stone Age. Like the episode before, we're probably going to have three main sections of this podcast. I'm going to be looking into the album, the first part. The second part, we're going to be looking into what you guys had to say. And then the third part of the episode, we're going to be looking into a topic revolving around the album. And today I wanted to talk about the origins of Queens of the Stone Age, specifically the Palm Desert music scene. And we're going to be looking into the massive web of genres, subgenres, fusion genres that sort of are the roots of that scene. And we're going to be looking at the overlap of the musicians as well. Basically just looking into where bands like Queens of the Stone Age came from and where all of those influences stemmed. So yeah, that's going to be today's episode. So without further ado, let's just kick on right into it. So first up, we're going to start off with some album stats. So release, lineup, reception, just so we have like a better understanding and foundation of what this album is. So, Like Clockwork is the sixth studio album of American rock band Queens of the Stone Age. It was released in June 2013 by Matador Records. This marks the band's departure from a major label to a much more smaller indie label. A lot of their albums they released with Interscope, and so they have now departed from that and signed on with Matador. And it sort of makes you wonder how much more autonomy and freedom they had with this record. In regards to the lineup and the contributions to the album, you've got Queens of the Stone Age, the band, but there was a bit of a rocky period happening when this album was being recorded. One of the main drummers, Joey Castillo, actually left halfway through the recording period and was replaced by Dave Grohl. You've also got other former members of the band from the past, like Nick Oliveri and Mark Lanigan, who sort of came in and helped with the album as well. And then you've also got some other features like Elton John, which I think is something different for Queens of the Stone Age. And there's also Alex Turner on the record as well, who's from the Arctic Monkeys. And that isn't so much of a surprise because Josh Homme, a member of Queens of the Stone Age, seems to have close network ties with the Arctic Monkeys. He did help produce their album Humbug, and subsequently Homme actually featured on their AM album, which was released 3 months later of the same year. So that would be September of 2013. Another notable contribution to the album is the visual artist Boneface, who created the album covers, the single covers, and helped with a lot of the animations for the music videos. His art really sort of gave already this multifaceted record more depth, because not only have you got, the music, which we'll get into, but also you've got these very spectacular visuals that are going with it, and they're very aligned with the feeling of the music. So yes, Boneface is also a massive asset to the success of this album. So within the month of Like Clockwork's release, it hit number 1 on the Billboard 200, and it dethroned Random Access Memories by Daft Punk. Other albums that were charting at the time include 13 by Black Sabbath, The 2020 Experience by Justin Timberlake, and Modern Vampires of the City by Vampire Weekend. Within the trajectory of the Queens of the Stone Age career, I think that Like Clockwork is sort of referenced as one of their most successful albums in regards to commercial ranking and reception, but it is also compared a lot to the success of Songs for the Deaf. Depending on who you ask, might be considered more successful, but I think it's quite subjective. They're two very different albums. One was released 10 years prior, so the beginning of the 2000s. One was released in 2013. I think they both show very different sides of the band and are successful in their own right. And before we jump into the album, I just want to say that this is being recorded by a Queens of the Stone Age fan. I've been a massive fan for such a long time, and I have so many people around me that are fans of their music too. You know, my best mate is a fan. We went and saw them in Finsbury Park in London in 2018, and that was really cool. My ex was a fan. My manager's wife was a fan. My teenage crush was a fan. Everyone was. So I've sort of come from a pool of Queens of the Stone Age appreciators. And I find this band to be so unique. They're so versatile and so progressive. And they have so many different elements that contribute to the sound of Queens of the Stone Age, but they're still able to really position themselves as a hard rock band. You know, they can do energy, they can do power riffs, they can do these fast-paced, energizing tracks that make you just want to run up a wall. But then they can also do slow, groovy harmonies with like a complementary beat, something that you want to dance to. So prior to the recording of this album, Josh Homme, the frontman of the band, was dealing with a couple of health complications. There was a surgery, and I think that sort of pushed him into sort of a depression. And you really see a lot of that sort of come out into the album. And I like that because to me, the mark of a good artist is not to create good art with unlimited budgets and resources and time and, you know, good mental health and everything like that. That's not what art's about. The mark of a good artist is being able to create good art from just like the trash fire garbage that you're given in life. And I feel like this album really signifies that. There were all of these things that Homme was going through. And then there was also there seems to be a lot of tension between the members as well. That saw the departure of one of the band members and was replaced by Dave Grohl for the rest of the album. So yeah, all of that seems to come out a lot in the lyrics and in the sound as well. And I actually found an interview published by Drowned in Sound from 2013. And I found this quote that Homme said in regards to sort of what the album is sort of signifying. And the quote is, "The undercurrent of the record is just be honest. And if something is scary, walk toward it, not away from it." And I really like this quote because you've got a lot of raw energy sort of vibrating out of this album. I feel that, especially because when I was listening to this album, I was listening to it in a part of my life when I was like permanently in fight or flight mode. Because there was a particular person that was in my life that was just wreaking havoc. And I had no control over it. And I felt very on edge. And I felt very, like my fight or flight mechanism was like at 100% for like 3 months. And I was listening to this album and it really just sort of helped me, I guess, sort of feel and process that through the lyrics, through a lot of the riffs, through a lot of the composition. You know, there's a lot of anguish, but there's also this newfound sensitivity of the band. And they're still able to deliver that with fast-paced tracks, but also like groovy earworms. And I feel like you get hit with that in the first part of the album. So when we're looking at the first 3 tracks, you've got Keep Your Eyes Peeled, you've got I Sat by the Ocean, and then you've got The Vampire of Time and Memory. And already, these 3 songs, there are like 3 different flavors that the Queens do right at the beginning of the album. So for example, first 40 seconds that you listen to of the first track, Keep Your Eyes Peeled, you've got this dirty power chord and bass sort of pulsating with the drums. And there's just so much simplicity and command in that. And I feel like that shows a much more heavier side of Queens. You've got that heavy metal influence really coming through. And I feel like that first track really plays off that heavier side of the band and the heavier side of the album. You know, that's the first track. And funnily enough, when it gets to the second track, I Sat by the Ocean, we switch to another side of the band that they do really well, and that's groove. All of these low-tuned, distorted power chords are stripped back, and they replace it with distortion still, but a different palette. It's cleaner, it's brighter, and the guitars are playing this groovy bop. Yeah, it's like a bit of a bop. And I think Queens are really good at positioning groove music still as hard rock. And if you take the skeleton of this song, the sort of main melodies and harmonies, you could make this into like a groovy funk beat, and you could produce a really good funky groovy song. And if you don't agree, I actually have something you can do. You can actually look onto they have a Spotify exclusive album that they released after Like Clockwork called Like Cologne. There's only 3 tracks on it, but on it is an acoustic live version of I Sat by the Ocean. And so I want you to listen to that. And it's really, and this is where they strip back the distortion even, and they still have the guitar parts and they still have Josh Homme singing, but just having like those main elements. I want you to listen to that. And then I want you to listen to September by Earth, Wind and Fire and tell me you don't see like similarities in the groove that they're using. It's just an example of just showing these different influences. And we're going to look into that later on into the podcast that sort of create this unique sound that Queens of the Stone Age are. So yeah, you've got Keep Your Eyes Peeled, that rumbly metal influence. And you've got I Sat by the Ocean, which is a brighter, groovier song. And then the third track, The Vampire of Time and Memory. I think this one sort of really signifies that newfound depth that we're seeing to the band because it's much more stripped back. It's a lot more emotional. Lyrics are a lot different to what we're used to with Queens of the Stone Age. And you've got 3 tracks like this on Like Clockwork, which I don't think has ever really happened before in their discography. They usually might have 1 track that's a little bit different to a lot of the songs on a record, but I think this is where Like Clockwork really differs because they have 3. The other 2 are Collapsia and the titled track Like Clockwork, which is the last track. My favourites of the 3 is Collapsia, and I really like this song because, if I'm not mistaken, this song is in the time signature of 12/8. So you've still got a typical 4/4 beat feel, but within each of those beats, you've got a sort of pulse of triplets. And it gives it that sort of waltzy, dreamy feel. And if you're not really sure about like that explanation, some other examples of songs in a 12/8 beat is At Last by Etta James, or you've got It's a Man's World, or I Put a Spell on You. It's a little bit more of a blues or soul type of time signature. And I think that's what it gives it sort of that waltzy, dreamy feel. And the track Collapsia actually reminds me of the track Fluff, which is featured on Black Sabbath's album Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. And Collapsia sort of does the same as what Fluff did. I think it's just sort of that retreat in an album. Black Sabbath was known for their pioneering of heavy metal and, you know, these really heavy riffs, but then they have this track Fluff, which sort of showed a deeper side to the band and showed the musicianship of the guitarists. They can do heavy metal, but they can do beautiful, delicate music. And I think Collapsia reminds me of that, especially with that 12/8 beat, because Fluff is sort of in the same time signature realm. So yeah, and that's just like the beginning of the album. So going back to like those first 3 songs, boom, it's heavy. Boom, we've got groove. And then boom, we've unlocked a new side to the band. That sensitivity that sort of built off of the turmoil of the recording period. And I'd like to go through one of my favorite songs. It's a bit of a tie between Keep Your Eyes Peeled and If I Had a Tail. But I want to talk about If I Had a Tail because I feel like, again, in that song, we've got a mix of what the band does really well. You've got that heaviness that sort of comes out in the chorus, and then you've got this syncopated guitar riff, the ding 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 ding. You know, it's that first guitar riff that you hear at the beginning of the song that sort of comes in and out. It's sort of around the verse, and then you've got that heaviness that comes in the chorus. I specifically really like this track because I think it's one of the ones that really sort of helped me get through the time that I was going through when I was listening to this album. And, you know, just even listening to the lyrics, they've got some real gems in here. One of my favorites is, tears of pleasure, tears of pain, they trickle down your face the same. It's how you look, not how you feel, a city of glass with no heart. If I had a tail, I'd own the night. I love this song so much. It just sort of really helped me but deal with that, as I said, that fight or flight response that I was feeling. And there was no better way to help me come to terms with that than listening to sort of the raw energy that comes out of a Queens of the Stone Age record. And I think that that's something that's really interesting that I believe about music. I don't think it's a theory. I think it sort of is a little bit more of a known fact. And I think that sounds really help us to figure out and connect with emotions that we can't do just by ourselves. Because when you think about emotions, really sort of intense emotions, a lot of them are irrational. And I feel like if we use our brains to sort of rationalize them, it doesn't really work out. It doesn't really help us sort of figure out what we're feeling and how to get through it. And I feel like sound is so abstract. Sometimes that is the only way that we can help ourselves to get through a feeling that is so irrational. I really connected with the lyrics because there is a lot of turmoil in the lyrics. I feel like a lot in the sounds, like the heaviness that comes through in the chorus really sort of helped me to feel like, yeah, I have this same dissonance and it's just stuck in my body and I don't know how to get it out. But when I'm listening to these songs, when I listen to distortion, when you listen to vocalists that are borderline screaming, you know, there's that pain, but it's just so crazy how that can help you as well. Specifically in this song, there's like in the chorus, so Homie sings the chorus and then the chorus gets played again, but it's just sort of the melody and Homie is just wailing the melody and it's backed by these heavy guitar riffs. And like that for me was like the ultimate sort of release in that song because that's what I felt. I don't mean to like interject my opinion and sort of my life into this, but it just being able to capture energy like that and being able to have people resonate with that energy is just, it's something that really helps you connect with like a listener base and it helps you become relatable as an artist. I mean, this is what musicians are. They create music and they create art and they create this sort of bridge between, you know, them and the listeners, and the connection is always the music. And one thing I really want to do with this podcast is I really want to get down to the bottom of, you know, why is it that we can all collectively listen to a sound and feel the same way? Like, that's just crazy to me. So yeah, If I Had a Tail was a big song for me that really helped me realize that I was in fight or flight, that I really, you know, I felt like I was growing spikes out of my back and I was ready to fight someone. Another thing I really wanted to talk about with this record is just the way that the vocals are mixed. They're really playing around with space. It does give the record that expansive sort of sound. They really do play around with Homie's vocals a lot. And he's already quite a versatile singer and performer. He really brings, again, a lot of versatility with his voice and the way that it sort of fits in with a lot of the Queen's songs. And the way that his vocals were mixed really sort of amplified that and helped with storytelling in a lot of the tracks. So for example, in Keep Your Eyes Peeled, when Homie sings the verses, you've got this medium reverb and this slight echo feedback on his voice. So it's sort of like he's like singing in like a medium room. At least that's what I'm visualizing. And in the chorus, it's just that reverb is taken away and it's almost like he's singing in front of you. And then to the second verse, the medium room sort of comes back again. And then towards the second verse, there's this dramatic interlude where these guitars come in, you know, they've got these delayed effects and the space opens up. He's got these massive dramatic delays and reverb, which sort of like mesh in with the guitars. But then when it comes back to the chorus, all of that is gone. And he's sort of like in front of you. He's positioned in front of you without these dramatic reverbs. And then when he's singing in the bridge, you've got his voice panned to each side of your ears, like he's whispering in your ear, or more like wailing in your ear. Within one track, the voice is everywhere. It's in a medium room, it's up close, medium room, it's out, the space is massive, he's in your ear. It's almost like this illusion of shadows. And it sort of really fits in with the lyrical content of Keep Your Eyes Peeled. You know, there's reference to smoke and mirrors. There's this reference to, you know, if life is but a dream, wake me up. And I think that that's just really creative, the way that they sort of use those vocals. You know, it's almost like I'm in a haunted house. He's here, he's there, he's in my ears. Where is he going to pop up next? I feel like the band really sort of plays with this throughout the record. You've also got in I Sat by the Ocean and My God Is the Sun, you've got Homie's vocals mixed in a way that it sounds like he's in like a very small vocal booth. So you can feel, you know, the closeness of the walls because of that, the echo that's automatically just bouncing back. It feels intimate. It feels like I'm in the band room with him and I'm listening to this song. Or it feels like, you know, maybe I'm in this beat up studio where you can see and feel that the walls are like, you know, there are these wooden walls, there's no absorption, and that's the effect it's giving over his voice. And that happens in I Sat by the Ocean. It happens in My God Is the Sun. They really sort of push it to the point where it's almost clipping. It also happens in Smooth Sailing as well, where the vocals are really, really in your face. But then there are moments in that track where the mixing changes. For example, at the 1 minute 26 mark in Smooth Sailing, Homie sings the line, "I'm in flagrante." And while he's singing that, the "I'm in" is sort of that front positioned vocal mix. And then when he says flagrante, it again just sort of like goes from being in front of you to just sort of pushing back. And then there's this massive dramatic reverb that sort of pushes the tail end of his voice back. And you're just like, whoa, like it's like he's a ghost that just disappeared. So yeah, I think those are a few examples of how I feel like they've really experimented and mixed the vocals differently, and I think that really helps with the storytelling. Also, in flagrante, going back to that Smooth Sailing lyric, in flagrante, I think that's also just an example of, you know, we've come a long way from the lyrics of Feel Good Hit of the Summer to using words like in flagrante, which I actually don't even know what that means. I'm going to look it up. So in flagrante means the act of doing something wrong, especially having intercourse with someone who is not your husband, wife, or usual partner. There you go. So yeah, I think that that's a lot of what I have to say about this album. As a summary, a very different side to Queen's, but they sort of expand on what they're really good at. You know, they've got those grooves coming through, you know, that heaviness coming through. You've got a little bit more of experimentation with Fair Weather Friends. You've got that 12/8 slow, dreamy song with QOTSA. And then you've got like classic high energy Queen songs like one of the singles, which is My God Is the Sun, which I didn't really touch on because I feel like My God Is the Sun is more of what they're known for. Whew. And yeah, just a lot of creative choices with the vocal mixes. And then I think that all of that is then amplified as well when it's paired with the visual art from Boneface, who created the album artwork, who created the animations for a lot of the music videos as well. So I would recommend giving those a watch because it just gives, again, that extra dimension. And it's just funny how like an album like this is following an album like Demon Days, which was the first album I sort of dived into on my debut episode, because in many ways they are very similar. You know, they've got this visual aspect to them, but then they've also got this sound, this very expansive sound that stems from a lot of genres. With Demon Days, it was a little bit more disjointed. They had a lot of elements coming in and out when it came to a lot of the tracks, whereas I feel like Queen's sort of solidify these sounds a little bit more in their songs. And you know, this is their 6th album. They've already got a foundation of sound that everyone is very aware of. We know what they do well. Whereas like the Demon Days was the sophomore album for Gorillaz, so it was more about establishing and experimenting that sound. Whereas Queens have already done that, and I feel like that's where Songs for the Deaf came in. And don't worry, we will get to it within time when I find my feet with this podcast. I posted to my Instagram, I asked what you guys had to say about Like Clockwork, and I did draw up sort of parallel between Songs for the Deaf in regards to like their most well-received and successful albums in the discography. And I got a lot of replies from you guys, so we're gonna look into that now. So Reptile God says, it's a good album, not as hard as the previous albums, but it's definitely the best of the softer. So yeah, we definitely see a softer side to this album, which is nice. It's nice to sort of see that. It's nice to see different avenues being explored. Chris Montes says, it's one of my favourite Queens of the Stone Age albums. It's a complete masterpiece. Carlos Deft says, best Queens of the Stone Age album. Damn Sanaless says, I mean, it's all right. So I feel like we do have, I guess you would have a split in any sort of fan base, but I feel like, yeah, if you're more sort of prone to hard rock and harder sounds, that's definitely where I feel like you would like Songs for the Deaf more. As I said before, they're both very successful in their own right, and I feel like they show different parts of the band off. Riley Wagner says, it's great, magnificent even. Joe Pedro Bossel says, my favourite stoner rock album, if it's considered stoner rock. And that's interesting because we're actually going to be looking into sort of stoner rock and desert rock later. AKA Beard says, it was quite a different direction from previous classic Queens of the Stone Age albums, but somehow I was hooked. Far more emotion in the instruments, more storytelling, video artwork was great too. This is Louise says, best album of the year, also my fave Queens of the Stone Age album along with the latest one. So yeah, I'm sure if I've got a lot of Queens of the Stone Age fans, you'll know that they just actually dropped an album. What's it called? In Times New Roman? I actually haven't listened to it. I've been so preoccupied with listening to old music. Yeah, In Times New Roman, ... is the name of their new album. It was released 10 years, exactly 10 years to the month after Like Clockwork. Because Like Clockwork was also June 2013. And this one was released June of last year, 2023. One user said, along with Rated R and Def, this album is one of the most important rock albums of the 21st century. Poster Devil says, groovy, dark, and damn cool. Their best since Songs for the Deaf, and happily sits in their top 4 albums. Oh yeah, definitely. I feel like it's almost like their top, is it their top 2? I don't know. I really loved Rated R. Rated R was like the gateway album into the Queens of the Stone Age for me. And one of my exes bought Rated R for me on vinyl. And then he took it back. He took it back when we broke up. He also got me the Black Sabbath album on vinyl. He took that back too. And mind you, I don't have a vinyl player. But I'm just wondering whether I'm going to see those records ever again. Yoport says, Boneface's video clips are mind-blowing. And they are. As I said before, you should go watch them. They give just this whole new colourful depth to their songs. We've got another user saying, amazing, but not as impactful as Songs for the Deaf. Another person says, one of the greatest albums ever. Love these guys. Someone said, first album tour of Queens of the Stone Age I went to 10 years ago in Dublin. What an atmospheric album. Oh, 100%. Someone said, I love it so much. I wrote a whole report on it for Junior English 3. Another person says, top 5 album of all time, second best Queens of the Stone Age album. I just wanted to add in here as well that I didn't post anything on my TikTok about this podcast, but then I posted something about wanting to hear from you guys about Like Clockwork and Songs for the Deaf. And I got one commenter, and I'm just going to read out what they had to say because it's really cool what they had to say. The TikTok user said, While one might argue Songs for the Deaf to be more influential and more sonically impressive, I find that the raw emotion of Clockwork is unrivaled. The album functions as an intricately layered time capsule of sorts that thematically frames a dark and brutal period for Homme and the band. Not an inherent novel concept, but one that's executed to perfection. Consisting of countless examples of their best lyrics to date, the record, when played in full, reads almost like a stream of consciousness, which is exemplified through the fade-in and out intros and outros, allowing songs to bleed into one another. Whether that's sonically, for example, If I Had a Tail, into My God is the Sun, or thematically, like Smooth Sailing into I Appear Missing. There's so much to dissect, and I look forward to tuning into the podcast. Your art is amazing, by the way. Oh, that's cute. But yeah, that's what one TikTok user had to say. The only TikTok person that commented. This is why I don't like TikTok. There is no sense of community on there. I think it's just all algorithms and virality. I like my Instagram community, though. You guys are really cool. So yeah, thank you for sending in your replies to my question. And then I just want to shout out, I've got a friend in Melbourne who actually bought a denim jacket I painted in the style of Queens of the Stone Age, and I actually painted it as inspiration from when I went to Queens of the Stone Age in Finsbury Park in London. I actually bought it with me, but I didn't wear it because when I was there, it was hot. Like, I got sunburnt in London. It was so hot. I couldn't wear the jacket. I wanted to, but I had the jacket in my archives for a while because Zigentala is also, or was, a fashion label, or like a label where I painted on denim jackets. And I've got a friend here who actually bought the Queens of the Stone Age jacket from me, and she replied as well, and she said, always love the direction Queens of the Stone Age goes. Shout out to you, Margie. Love you. Okay, so that's a lot of what you guys had to say. So now we're getting into the topic of sort of where Queens of the Stone Age came from, the origins of their sound, and just like the complicated web of rock genres that sort of overlap. There's a lot of networks of musicians that sort of overlap as well. And sort of, what is it? Where did it come from? What were the influences? Let's go. A lot of you would know, and especially if you're a fan of Queens of the Stone Age, it's probably just common knowledge. Queens of the Stone Age get categorized into this genre called stoner rock. And so stoner rock is sort of a fusion genre of metal, of psychedelic music, and acid rock. And I actually found a resource online. It's a website called Monster Riff. You know, it knows all things stoner rock. They've got album reviews, everything on there. According to this online resource, you've got 3 elements that define stoner rock, and that's the use of guitar riffs, the use of slow tempos, and groove. And within stoner rock as a genre, you've got a lot of bands that sort of pioneered it. One of the most well-known bands is QOTSA, which was the band that Josh Homme was in before he created Queens of the Stone Age. And in this band as well is Nick Oliveri, which also is a member of Queens of the Stone Age and also created bands that would go on to sort of pioneer stoner rock. And QOTSA came from Palm Desert, California. Now, you've also got other bands that sort of come under stoner rock. Another one is the band Sleep, and that's from San Jose, California. You've also got Monster Magnet, which originated from Red Bank, New Jersey. And then you've got Masters of Reality as well, which formed in Syracuse, New York, but are pretty linked with Palm Desert. QOTSA came from Palm Desert, California, and is considered stoner rock. But then a lot of these bands that came from like the Palm Desert music scene are sort of more considered desert rock. And so desert rock is allegedly a subgenre of stoner rock. So the stoner rock bands that came out of Palm Desert are desert rock, and then you've got the stoner rock bands that may have come from other different regions in America. They are just stoner rock. You've also got, at the time, there are lots of other subgenres of metal and rock that are sort of kicking around as well. Not specifically in Palm Desert, but related in a way. One of them is sludge metal. And according to Metal Music Archive's website, sludge metal is music that started in the late 1980s And it was when hardcore punk bands really started to slow their tempos down and really started to sort of push slow tempos with much more heavier music. So that's sludge metal. It's an extreme subgenre of metal music. And then you've also got stoner metal, which is very much like stoner rock, but it is faster and heavier. You've got doom metal, which is sort of less melodic and less groovier than stoner rock. And then you've got fuzz rock, which is the same as stoner rock, but apparently it sort of rejects that stoner label and incorporates more elements from the 70s, more fuzz pedals, more solos, more jamming, more psychedelic influence. So we've got stoner rock, we've got desert rock, which is stoner rock that comes from Palm Desert, California, and then at the time, loosely connected genres with stoner rock was also sludge metal, stoner metal, doom metal, and fuzz rock. Stay with me here. So now looking specifically at Palm Desert in California. So you've got desert rock, which is a subgenre of stoner rock, also known as stoner rock that comes out of the Palm Desert scene. And now if we're looking at like the Palm Desert scene and sort of how that really expanded and flourished. Obviously there were all of these different genres sort of banging around at the time. And then in the late 80s in Palm Desert, the reason that the music scene sort of really started to expand is that there are these things that happened and they were called generator parties. I'm also getting all of this information from Monster Riff as well. So if you're really into like this type of stuff and you want more information, definitely go check this website out. There were these things that happened called generator parties, and it's basically where a lot of the youth would go out into the deserts and they would have parties in which these bands would play. And they were called generator parties because, you know, these bands were very much influenced by stoner rock. You know, there was lots of metal influences, there was lots of punk influences. So obviously they had amps, you know, they needed amplification, and it got popular to the point that they dragged out these gasoline generators into the desert so that they could play these gigs. And it was also a very popular way to socialize because if you had these gigs at like house parties, they would usually get interrupted and shut down by the police. But the strategy of having it out in the desert meant that if the police did come, you know, everyone would just scatter. You know, it wasn't an established house. It wasn't in the middle of the town. So I feel like they got away with a lot of stuff, and they could I guess they could experiment more. They could play louder music. They could be probably more diabolical. Obviously there was lots of dancing, illicit substances, drinking, barbecues, but the main thing coming from these parties is that these bands were playing. And so this is where we sort of saw the rise of bands like QOTSA. This is the really cool thing I love about music and learning about its origins, because most of the time when we are looking at roots and the formation of massive bands like Queens of the Stone Age, you know, it came from humans just doing human things. And that's all music will ever be. It's a human thing. You know, it's a way that we socialize and connect. It's a way that we express ourselves. And what I would give to sort of like be in that time, even just to experience going to like one of these desert parties and just listening to some punk rock band. Your parents probably don't know where you are. You're drinking, even just being in the desert at night. It's just really cool learning about this and learning that, yeah, it just sometimes these massive genres just come from such humble roots. As a comparison, I actually grew up quite different to the desert. I actually grew up in the snow. And I remember when I turned 18, you know, one of the most exciting things for me was like being able to be a part of like this sort of underground culture that was happening in one of the villages at the time. And that was that because we were a ski resort and a snowboarding resort, you know, there was this link with snowboarding and skateboarding and surfing. And there was this sort of underground scene in one of the villages where they would put together all of these skate parts on the dance floor of a club, and they would host these skate nights. And so it would basically be like you're there, you're drinking cheap beer or you're drinking Sailor Jerry's and you're just watching people do skate tricks. You know, it was just like a really cool scene. Sometimes like a punk band would play, or, you know, that's where I got introduced to a lot of music where it was like punk, it was metal, it was sort of, yeah, like this fusion of like different genres all together. For me, that was like a really exciting and magical part about turning 18, is because I was able to really be a part of like these underground scenes. And that scene obviously didn't amount to anything, you know, there was no big musical influence that came from it, but it just shows that, you know, just those humble beginnings, as I said, human things that you do. You go out, you socialize, you meet people, you listen to music, you know, you partake in some sort of cultural thing that everyone's doing. And that's what I really like about hearing about this Palm Desert scene and these generator parties. It just sounds like it would be a really cool time. So you've got bands like Caius, which really sort of were able to develop their sound through these generator parties. You also had Yawning Man as well. And so that happened around late 80s. And then by the late 90s, the generator parties were not as popular. The youth or the people that went to these parties sort of disbanded and did their own things. I guess they grew up, they moved out. Who knows? And Caius broke up in 1995. So you've got Caius, who was very important in the development of stoner rock, especially in the Palm Desert scene. And then once Caius disbanded, a lot of the members went out, created their own labels and bands that really developed that desert rock sound further. And that's when, you know, between the mid-90s and the 2000s, we saw bands like Queens of the Stone Age and Eagles of Death Metal. I also feel like desert rock really differs to stoner rock because you see a lot more influences. Another sort of avenue of genre that I think really influenced desert rock and Queens of the Stone Age is grunge. And we can see this crossover because after Caius broke up, Homme actually went and toured with Screaming Trees, which is a band from Washington that is very much sort of in the grunge scene. Think Alice in Chains, Nirvana, Soundgarden. And so what happened is Homme actually toured with them, and then he created Queens of the Stone Age. And then Mark Lanegan actually would come and join Homme with Queens of the Stone Age. He helped with Rated R, the album, and then he would also go on to contribute for Songs for the Deaf. And also there's like a full circle moment there as well, because you've got Mark Lanegan, you've got Screaming Trees, you've got that sort of Seattle, Washington grunge movement happening, which had Nirvana in it. And then obviously the drummer of Nirvana is Dave Grohl, who was a massive contributor to Queens of the Stone Age, especially Songs for the Deaf. So there's this massive web of musicians, this massive web of genres that sort of spanned from the late 80s to the late 90s that really helped develop stoner rock, and that really helped desert rock to become a thing as a subgenre of stoner rock. Because when you actually look at the Wikipedia page for desert rock or the music that came out of the Palm Desert scene, there is a lot of influences that are listed. You know, it's psychedelic, it's grunge, it's punk, it's metal, it's blues. There's so much, and you can see all of those influences in Queens of the Stone Age and the music that they create, not just in Like Clockwork, but also in the whole of their discography. And the reason I wanted to also list all of those other genres like sludge metal, stoner metal, fuzz rock, doom metal, I feel like they all are an example of just like these fusions of these different genres, and sort of how the Palm Desert scene really was just like a pool of all of these sounds. It's just fascinating. I love it. It's complicated. It took me a while to sort of pinpoint all of these sort of like influences and genres. And a lot of them cited, you know, the classic pioneers of heavy metal, like Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, and then you've got like the psychedelic icons, your Jimi Hendrix and Cream, and all of these hard rock bands were then the influence from all of these fusion genres that also helped to create this pool of music, of sound. And then all of a sudden you have all of these bands that are coming out of Palm Desert. So I think that shows just like the complex musical roots of Queens of the Stone Age. And we see that on Like Clockwork. And you can also just see that within the legacy of the band. But yeah, desert rock, stoner rock, Queens of the Stone Age, Like Clockwork. That's what I have to say about all of that. All right, guys, I think that's the end of the episode. I think I'm done yelling into this microphone. I hope you really liked this episode. It was a monster of an episode to prepare for. Keep in mind, I'm also working full time. So my motivation rests in this podcast. It doesn't rest in anything else in my life. I have no motivation to do anything else. I want to do this podcast, and I really hope you enjoyed it. I really tried to get really in the nitty-gritties of the album, and also in the roots of the album, the roots of the sound of Queens of the Stone Age. So I hope you really enjoyed listening to that. Please make sure, well, one, actually, could you please rate my podcast? It would mean the world to me. I've got 5 ratings, which I'm really excited about. One of them might have been from me. So I've got 4 ratings, but if you could rate the podcast, that'd be really good. And yeah, make sure to follow Zigentala. Make sure to stay tuned on my stories. The next album I painted on my denim tote bag was Tame Impala, and that's where I think I'm going to cut it with doing the albums in chronological order, because for me, those are really good as like the first 3. I did Currents by Tame Impala. Would love to talk about that album, so we'll probably do that next episode. And then, so I'm going to cut off the chronological order thing with my denim tote bag. We're still going to be doing albums on the tote bag, but we're going to be doing, maybe we'll cut to like the Strokes or like a Nirvana album or something like that. But please make sure to stay tuned. Take care of yourself. Make sure you listen to good music, and I will see you, and I'll see you in the next episode, guys. Okay. Bye-bye. Ciao. Bye. Bye. Auf Wiedersehen. Ciao. Okay, bye.